My husband used to date a beauty queen title holder of a well-known pageant before he and I got together. They broke up before we met. She was a statuesque blonde, very tall, and an absolute knockout in my opinion. This is important to the story. While she was a dazzling pageant winner on the outside, on the inside, it was a very different story. She could be charming and beautiful if she needed to be, but mostly, she treated people around her terribly, including my husband. And one day, he eventually got fed up and broke things off with her. However, she never went away. She would continue to call and email him repeatedly, even after my husband and I met. If anything, her calls increased. She would call over and over again, day and night, even after my husband, then boyfriend, blocked her number. She would ask for money and would threaten to go to the police and claim that he abused her if he didn't give in to her demands. He never gave her any money, and this infuriated her. The threats continued and became more malicious. When that didn't work, she would switch tactics. She would then sweetly ask him to help her with certain projects she was trying to get off the ground, or more accurately, have him do all the work for her and she'll take all the credit, with the promise that if he did this one last thing for her, she would go away. My husband knew better and did not reply, so she soon went back to being malicious again. Anything for attention, or for what she really wanted from him, money. My husband became terrified because, of course, while he never did anything to her, it would be her word over his, and he was terrified of ruining his reputation and career. We unfortunately ended up at an event she also was attending. She had been waiting for us to arrive, and had placed herself near the entrance of the event. As we walked in, she stood across the room, looking me up and down, laughing and whispering into the ear of her date, making it a point to try and make me feel uncomfortable. But that was fine. It was easy for me to ignore her. Until she ambushed me as I came out of the bathroom. She had clearly been waiting for the moment when I was alone. She was very tall, and she towered over me. For context, I'm 5'5". I had no intention of getting into it with her, and I hurried past her to find my husband. But she kept pace beside me, hunched over, so she was at my eye level. She looked like something straight out of a Tim Burton film, hunched over with that crazy demonic smile. "Watch your back, pug," she added, grinning. She liked to call me names like Pug, because I own a pug, and I guess she thought it was an insult. What I didn't know is that while I was in the bathroom, she walked over to my husband while he was talking to someone, and had thrown her arm around him as if she and my husband were together. My husband unwrapped himself from her and told her to get lost. She then beelined it and waited for me outside of the bathrooms. We stopped going to parties after that night. The last time we ran into her was at a funeral for a mutual friend. She followed me around at the wake, as my husband was talking to the man's widow. I was talking to another friend and his wife. She walked right up and stood with us, joining us in mid-conversation as if she were part of the group. It was unnerving, but also just bizarre. But this was a funeral, and I didn't want to make a scene. I silently picked my glass of wine off the bar and walked away, leaving her with the couple I had just been speaking to. She stared at me with a smirk on her face. All in all, annoying but manageable. However, the emails and calls never stopped. She would call my husband over and over again, night and day, even though he had blocked her number. She would also drive by our house. Once I found my car keyed after leaving it outside for a night. Obviously, I couldn't prove it was her, but my husband and I knew who it was, and enough was enough. My husband had a lawyer send her a cease and desist After the first, she called him from a private number. He answered and she said, "Hi, it's me." Like they were the best of friends, and he hadn't just sent her a legal document demanding that she stay away from him and his family. He said nothing and hung up. Another cease and desist was sent, then a third. Nothing would make her go away. She couldn't handle that my husband was capable of not wanting her. Eventually she became infuriated that my husband was not giving in. So she decided to take this rage to the internet. I knew that she was checking out my social media accounts, but I didn't really use them much, so I didn't care. She created a fake Twitter account and tweeted out that my husband was a fraud. She then tagged his colleagues, friends, investors, family members, every single person she could think of to try and ruin his reputation and career. We went to the police, armed with the threatening emails of extortion and false allegations. She was charged with 2 counts of harassment, and a restraining order was put in place. To our shock, the next day our phones were buzzing. This story had made front-page news. Clearly it was a slow news day. Her day in court came right before the COVID pandemic. We arrived to the courthouse and sat down. She walked in. We were shocked by her appearance. Gone was the statuesque, dazzling blonde. She had apparently shaved her head and was wearing a short, ratty brown wig. She had gained about 80 pounds, give or take. It was now sort of hunched. With her height and new weight, she looked like a linebacker. To add to her new look, she wore a bulky brown men's overcoat and a scarf tied over her wig, like a babushka. My immediate thought was, her outside now matches her inside, but her eyes is the thing that I noticed the most. A year earlier, we showed a picture of her to our kids, which should give you an idea of how long this was going on for, saying that if this woman ever approached them, they should run. At the time, my son, who was very young, commented that she had mean eyes. Maybe it was because she changed so much physically, but her dark eyes had narrowed into deep black slits. As she scanned the courtroom and saw us, she would turn around every so often to look back at us and glare. She would then whisper into her lawyer's ear and laugh as if she were having a grand old time. She had a pair of big, round, cheap sunglasses that she would put on and take off intermittently. When she addressed the judge, she would put them on, and he promptly asked her to remove them. We thought she was putting on a brave face and treating all of this like a joke, but we were about to find out. Getting arrested would not slow her down. The restraining order didn't seem to faze her at all. If anything, it angered her even more. From then on, she would post from multiple fake social media accounts photos of myself and my husband. She would post a photograph of my husband with the caption, "pedophile," and other terrible names. To give you a slight idea, she posted altered pictures of my husband, photoshopped to look like he was wearing heavy makeup, and referring to him as a, quote, pre-op transgender. She posted more altered and unflattering photos of myself, calling me old and ugly. Those are just the G-rated ones. There was a lot worse. The name calling, while obsessive and gross, wasn't what bothered me the most. Although I'm not going to lie, hundreds of photos of myself on her fake Twitter account, obsessively pointing out every single preconceived flaw, did succeed in dragging me down at times. So why did I keep looking? Part of it was my own morbid curiosity, glimpsing into a mind that was unraveling. But also she could have dropped hints if she was planning on doing something else. Because it wasn't just her insulting posts that were concerning. There were sinister captions, like, "Keep an eye on your kids because I'll be watching," Why don't you plant some flowers in your front yard? Be good to your kids because you never know what could happen. How was your Uber Eats order? She would post photos of me with an arrow directed to my head, which I figured was some kind of threat. She posted pictures of my husband's workplace, which he was not allowed to be within 2 blocks of, in accordance to the restraining order. But the police said that this could just be a picture she took from the internet, which was a complete cop-out. She would share these Agatha Christie quotes. Every killer is usually someone you know well. Your end is near. Her profile picture was taken from a movie called Stalker, like she was in on the joke. We called the police again, but they said that there wasn't anything that they could do, since she didn't directly tag us. I took screenshots of everything. Most of her posts were photos of us on this fake account. We never managed to get it shut down. I became anxious every time my kids were outside shooting hoops in the driveway. My elderly mother wouldn't take the baby out in the stroller. She was too frightened. The situation affected all of our lives. Things were becoming dramatic. Mrs. Beauty Queen taunted us with posts that said, "Catch me if you can," while posting close-ups of her dog's genitals or a piece of dog shit with my name beside it. The implication was obvious. It still bothers me knowing that she had a dog, since I didn't think anyone like her was capable of caring for anything. The calls then started back up. This time, our home line. Yeah, we still have one of those. "Bitch, karma will get you." And then made this weird chant-like sound, as if she was reciting an incantation. Sure enough, she posted photos of a pentagram with candles and the caption, "Ring ring." Finally, the police asked us to come in and give statements. We gave them a drive containing thousands of screenshots of posts that she had made. They arrested her again and charged her with 2 more counts of criminal harassment. She would frequently mention our kids in a very ominous way in her online rants, calling them rude names, which I won't repeat here. My husband was furious at this point. I just wanted to get this over with. The judge also issued a social media ban for her. By the time she was arrested for the second time, her fake Twitter account had over 16,000 tweets in a 3-month span. She had no followers, so they were just mostly to herself. At this point, I kid you not, I felt weird walking into my own kitchen at night to make a sandwich, feeling creeped out that she might be outside watching. I put nothing past her, as there's nothing more dangerous than a desperate woman who has nothing to lose. That was one of the quotes she posted. I have no idea what was wrong with her. From what I researched, it's possible she is a malignant narcissist with perhaps some other mental issues at play. I wanted to mention that we heard from a reliable source that after my husband broke up with her, she allegedly became known to the police for other reasons. While my husband dodged a bullet regarding her threats to go to the police saying that he abused her, apparently, other men have not been so lucky. We'll end this story with a quote from one of her posts. Some of her online rantings were done in her native language. This had to be translated into English, which is why it is strangely worded. It was a statement to let us know that she enjoyed this drawn-out court process. Violent women, and the cruelest, never answer questions. They like to continue the misunderstanding indefinitely, so I seek to contact people only to torment them. My cruelty is my last attachment to the world. It was the fall of 2007, and I was living in New York. I was a competitive athlete in high school, the type who got up before school for workouts and trained for long hours. With recruiting season a year away, I was under tremendous pressure to perform in my sport, as well as in the classroom. At the time, I was struggling to keep up in calculus, so my mom suggested a tutor. She made an appointment with a teacher friend of hers who really knew this stuff. I had been going to him on a regular basis, about 3 times a week for a month, before I ran into Alex. Alex had a tutoring session after mine. We had crossed paths every week. It had never been more than a glance and a smile, as I was incredibly shy and terrified to talk to boys. He was tall and blonde with piercing blue eyes, so naturally, I thought he was very good looking. One day my tutor had to change his schedule and decided to book us together, as we were learning the same topics in calculus. I was shocked and delighted when Alex started chatting with me after the class and asked me for my number. I had never had a boy pay attention to me in that way, and I was flattered that someone that attractive wanted my number. Eventually, Alex and I began dating. Alex went to Catholic school in another town, but he lived in the same town as I did. He took the bus every morning from my school to his. This gave us most mornings together, and he was able to meet my friends. I was a bit taken aback when they didn't take to him like I did. They mentioned him seeming weird, and I got super defensive, but I eventually let it go. I realized that I had been spending less time with them than I normally did, and assumed that they were just jealous that I had a boyfriend. As time went on, things became more serious, and I eventually lost my virginity to him in the back of his Ford Escape. That's when things began to change. While Alex and I always talked regularly, he started getting over the top about staying in contact with me. He would make me stay on the phone with him all hours of the night, until eventually my mom started taking my phone before I went to sleep. This relationship began taking a toll on my athletic career. I was too tired to spend any extra time training, and I began skipping my practices to see him, driving 30 minutes each way to his school. Eventually, my friends sat me down and told me how unhealthy this relationship had become. I had isolated myself from them, and my entire free time was spent with Alex. At this point, I wanted so badly to end the relationship. I had fallen out of love with Alex. College applications were approaching. I had been scouted by 10 schools. My plan was to attend Brown University, my dream school. Alex's obsession with our relationship had taken a huge toll on his grades, and Brown wasn't going to be an option for him. I remember telling him that's where I planned on going, and he freaked out, saying that he would never be accepted there, and begged me not to go. At the time, I was also recruited by the University of Illinois. Alex applied there, in hopes that I would ditch Brown and go to Illinois with him. That was the final straw for me, and I ended things with Alex for good, and I assumed that was it. I still had to see him, because Alex would take the bus from my school to his every morning. I remember walking into school past him and his classmates, who rode the bus with him. One of his friends called me a slut as I walked past. Apparently he had spread a rumor that I was cheating on him. I tried to ignore it, but that's when I started getting messages on my Facebook from random people who went to his school. I spent months getting nasty messages, accusing me of having STDs and telling me that I was going to get gangbanged. Eventually I had to shut down my Facebook because it wouldn't stop. In retrospect, I think deleting my Facebook was what set off the stalker tendencies in Alex. He wasn't able to see my face online, so he started calling me non-stop and sending me desperate emails saying that he loved me. While this was going on, I was the favorite to win the high school championship in my sport. I had gone undefeated all season. Alex ended up showing up while I was competing for the championship, and I saw him there. It shook me up so badly that I ended up losing. I was furious and heartbroken. I ended up answering one of his calls later that night and screaming into the phone, telling him to never contact me ever again. That's when the threats began. I got a call a few nights later from Alex after he texted me saying that he had something important to tell me. Stupidly, I answered. He began to tell me how he was going to kill me. He was going to show up at my house when my parents were at work with a rope and knife and make me suffer like I had done to him. I began to cry. He went on to say that he was going to get me before I went to college. I was driving my own car at this point, and he said he knew where I parked every morning, and my parents were never going to find me. I decided to record what was being said and had it taped on my phone. I hung up once I felt he had said enough. The next morning I went to school extra early, much earlier than I figured that he would be there. I showed my advisor the recording, who then called my mom. I remember feeling a deep-rooted shame as my mom listened to the recording, like I had done something to bring this on myself. My advisor was so alarmed by the recording, he advised me to go to the police. My mom and I were in the police station all day, explaining the story of my relationship with Alex and how it got to this point. The police then drove to his high school and arrested him while he was in class. The topper on the day, though, was when I went out to bring food back to the police station for my mom and I pulled into the parking lot at the same time that Alex arrived there in a cruiser. I saw him in cuffs, and he in fact did look like he wanted to kill me. Post-arrest, we got a restraining order against Alex, and he was sent to a mental institution to be evaluated. He did end up breaking the restraining order on more than one occasion. I contacted the police, but they didn't think it was cause to do anything about it. I think it's important to note that Alex's family was very wealthy and was well known in the area. It's not really surprising that they tried to brush this under the rug. I ended up attending Brown and had to inform them of the restraining order to let them know that Alex should not be allowed on campus. It's been over a decade since this all happened, and I still continue to receive phone calls and friend requests from Alex. I recently moved across the country from where this all happened. I finally feel safe now that I'm far away from Alex, but anytime I get a blocked call or a text from a number I don't know, a thought goes through my head that it's him. It's safe to say that this experience has changed who I allow into my life and who I choose to date. I'm a female. This happened when I was 13, so I was fairly naive at the time. I was a major introvert and only had a few friends in my school. I wanted to be more social, but I naturally preferred to be alone so I could read and write. In early November, I was added to a group text from a few of my friends and a couple more numbers I didn't recognize. The group was planning on hanging out at a park near our school that night. My parents would never allow me to go. Luckily, they were heading out for an overnight trip, and they wouldn't be back until 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place. My parents left around 8 o'clock. I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do before I left was lock the door. My folks are very paranoid, and that was the biggest thing they ingrained in me. Once I got to the park, I noticed a creepy figure standing near the edge of the forest. No one else seemed to notice it. I already had a reputation as a weirdo who was obsessed with true crime, so I didn't mention it. The night went on, and I was having a lot of fun, ignoring that sinking gut feeling I had. Every so often, I would look over my shoulder, and the figure was still standing there, watching us. It was around 9:45, when 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave because of curfew. It was getting cold, and it was nearly pitch black out, with only a few streetlights on. The rest of us decided to leave as well. The park we were hanging out at has a field that was fenced in with only a few exits. The front of the field faced an empty road, with either side bordered by forest. All of the group except for me were being picked up by cars. I didn't want to ask for a ride because my parents might find out, and of course the figure reappeared by the exit I had to take to get home. As I walked, I tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I had listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably in his early 40s or late 30s. I would say he was around 5'9", with dark hair and a beard. He stood about 10 feet from the exit. When I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and into the forest. Once I felt safe enough, I just started to quickly walk through the woods, at least until I got to the road. I heard a branch snapping behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the man. He was walking slowly, almost as if he was trying to not seem suspicious, but it only made my fear intensify. I turned back around and began jogging towards the road. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. After about 7 minutes of jogging, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run the rest of the way if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away from me. He had kept pace this entire time. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I could hear his footsteps pounding on the concrete behind me. I dove down an alleyway I knew well, trying to lose him. I could hear his heavy breathing as he tried to keep up. As I ran up the steps, I looked behind me. He had just arrived at the bottom of the porch steps when I managed to unlock the door, burst through it, quickly closing it behind me, just before he threw his entire body against it. I ran around the house, locking all the doors and windows. I turned off the lights and hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he managed to get inside. Fortunately, he didn't. If this was a better world, this is where my story would end. I never told anyone about what happened, since I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out. My loner status returned. I began writing fictional horror stories as a coping mechanism, and never went out past 7. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home from her bus stop. The man that she described was the exact same man who had stalked me and chased me home. Another female student had a similar story. I didn't join the discussion, but everyone knew that there was some weirdo stalking girls outside of our school. As time passed, everyone seemed to forget about him, and I eventually moved on from it myself. I was getting ready to go to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man. She told me that this guy had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped from the local jail, and to call the cops right away if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time because the picture was of the same man who had followed me home that night. It still haunts me to think what he would have done to me if he had caught me.